Brother, how are you?
Hey, what's up, Jordan? I'm well. How are you today, man?
I'm good. It's been a long day, but it's been a good day.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah, likewise here. Just popped off of a conference call for work at 3, and now I got to shift kind of modes a little bit
Yeah.
to get
Um,
to get
I-
into chat with you, man. Yeah. So thank you for taking some time.
yeah, this is gonna be good. I've been looking forward to it all. Well, in a virtual week for the past 7 days or so.
Yeah, likewise, man. Likewise. And I wanted to get it done before Lent. Are you participating in Lent?
I am.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I'm participating in Protestant Lent, so
yeah.
I've been what do you call it? Abstaining from all wheat products, which has been quite perfect because I funded a bakery and they
Hmm.
opened a month ago. And my wife's been going and buying like chocolate croissants and all kinds of tasty confections, and I just get to look at them and not eat them.
Of
But
course.
so that's like the weakest sauce, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that, but that's basically what I've been doing.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. And I've really got back into the rhythm of Lent the last few years, and I'm like telling my wife, I'm like, we got to go hard this Lent. We only got 20, 30 left in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And it seems they come back so quickly, and I'm so grateful for this time. And I don't know what it is. Maybe that there's a lot of folks with this intention participating in Lent that makes the ability to do so not easier, but more meaningful, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, good deal. So yeah, I had a lot of things I want to talk with you about. Just trying to kind of narrow it down. But first, I wanted to say it was excellent meeting you last week at the Symbolic World Summit. It's really wonderful and special, and it was interesting to me how quickly the surrealness of meeting people that you've connected with virtually. And I met you for the first time, and it was surreal for about 3 seconds, and then it became like talking to an old friend. It was the strangest most normal thing. I don't know if you had that experience as well.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely did. I had that experience as well. You're right. I can remember when I first ran into Jonathan. Um, it had the feeling of stepping through something. Like there was like a thin layer of surreal, and then
Mm-hmm.
stepping through it, and then being, oh, okay, now we're in the back in the real.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's so interesting.
yeah, it's very cool. And maybe we could start and just we can briefly talk about the summit, the Symbolic World Summit. What was your kind of takeaway from it, or your couple of high level takeaways that come up for you right now?
Well, okay, so maybe three. The first is I thought it was truly wonderful. In fact, many people commented when I got back with just I was just like glowing. So it was like truly wonderful in many different ways. And second, this is in a context where I've almost given up on going to events or gatherings because they're almost universally disappointments. So it's not that my standard is I enjoy them or even if they're neutral, but usually borderline catastrophic. And this one was truly wonderful. So it's a large distance in my experience or my sense of things. Um, and there were so many different elements to that. So I really thought that some of the all of the talks that what I went to were great. And I don't like trade that word trivially. All the talks I went to were in fact actually great. Um, I met a very large number of people with a very diverse set of perspectives and backgrounds and life stories. And we had an ability to get into, um, for the most part, very good, in some cases, quite touching and intimate conversations and relationships. And I learned a lot. So I mean, it's hard to do better than that, to be honest.
Yeah, excellent. What do you think it was? I had the same feeling. I've been to a lot of conferences with work and outside of work, and there's this kind of sterility to it. You're kind of herded in and out, and then it's mealtime, and they got the meal set up there, and there's a kind of sterility or some kind of that was lacking almost completely at this event. What do you think it was about this event that made it different like that?
Well, I think that there was obviously a natural filter. There's a certain very particular kind of person for very particular kinds of reasons would choose to come at all. Right? There was definitely no how would you say, superficial reason to be there. You were there because whatever was on offer there, either the community or the content, was something you were authentically passionate about. You were attracted to it because it was beautiful.
Hmm.
Um, and although it doesn't have the feeling of being a true Hodge, it still had a feeling of there were no looky-loos. Like nobody who went there, I thought was sort of neutral.
Hmm.
Everybody was quite in. Like there was a strong sense of committed to something. And then interestingly enough, at the same time, didn't have a dogmatic felt feeling or a hardness to it. It was like a commitment in the right way, where there was
Hmm.
strong commitment and at the same time, like tremendous curiosity and excitement about what the implications of what was unfolding were going to be. It may also have been that because of this virtual stuff, there actually was a lot of ambient relationality. Like people didn't necessarily know each other in real life, but there did seem to be a pretty sizable amount of long-term friendships in a virtual field that were coming together. So it was almost like a family reunion sensibility.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Um, and maybe we can get into this, the aspect of the virtual and the actual and the relationship therein, because it's easy to critique the virtual and, we need to get away from these screens and it's hard to connect. But without the virtual, and the practical aspect, I would have never met you. Actually, would have never found my way back into Christianity. So it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as straightforward. How do you feel? And this was the first time I've ever been in an environment where I was recognized and thanked for my work, so to speak. And it felt cool. It felt inspiring. I didn't expect that. And I know you've probably have had that before. Did you get that at this conference? And how do you see that?
I did. I'd say I maybe got a little bit too much for my
Yeah.
for my taste. Um, which is, no, I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But maybe the first tone is it was honest. Like the people who were thinking me honestly, and it was powerful. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't often get a feeling of, we call it positive feedback when I, post a video or write an essay. And something about comments and whatnot don't really seem to leave the right vibe. Negative feedback leaves a plenty of vibe, but positive doesn't, for me at least. And so my experience is very much, and this is honestly somewhat useful because I don't have any egoic attachment to the publishing. I don't do it because I want to feel seen or liked or important or anything. In fact, it almost feels like a duty. Like I do it because I feel like I'm responsible to do it. And I oftentimes fight as long as I can before I have to. But in this case, people were definitely actually authentically helped in a way that seemed meaningful, like in a deep way. And being able to be present to that, almost like embodied, like it put flesh on the feeling of why that duty was a duty in the first place. So grounded in a deeper place. And then the thing that I was saying earlier, the too much is, to the degree to which it actually got in between just being able to have an ordinary relationship, that's trouble. I really saw that with Peterson. I mean, he is, I think we may mention, like he's in a really, really suffering in a bubble of celebrity. And that's deeply disabling because it makes it
Hmm.
impossible for him to be in a relationship with the people he's around in that context. I mean, obviously, hopefully he's able to be in a relationship with his family. Um, but I was able to sort of walk among all the people in the audience, and 98% of it was just a very nice, like fellowship, and just a small amount of having to say, hey, guess what? You may have seen, whatever 50 videos that I've been in. I'm just an ordinary guy just like you. So let's cut to the chase and figure out how to, where we're going to meet.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Um, And I loved one of my favorite parts of the conference was I was able to, there's this shrine in the area here, and I was born and raised in the Tarpon Springs area, and it's St. Michael's Shrine. It's been there for, decades, maybe 80 years. And there's a healing icon of St. Michael there. There was a big story back in the 30s and 40s, I think it was, where this family was healed by St. Michael by this icon that they went and got from Greece, got permission and brought it back. And now there's a shrine there. And something in, my life just keeps at different times, even before I came back to Christianity, would somehow orbit around this shrine there. And I met the person, his name is Michael, and actually he owns a restaurant up kind of where I work. And I randomly went into the restaurant and I did my cross before I ate, caught his eye, and then we started talking thereafter. And then cut to 2 years later, he's the one that goes every morning, and it's probably 45 minutes out of his way, just unlocks the shrine in the morning before he goes to work, and he's been doing that for years. And had a conversation with him. He's the one who took me to St. Anthony's Monastery, built a relationship with him. He ended up being the one to baptize all three of my children at that shrine there, which was pretty cool. So anybody that had an interest of going there, I'm like, let's go. I probably went there 3, 4 times in one day, and it's hard to articulate what's special about it, but there's a sort of felt presence in there that's you know, that's interesting to be around. And I was, grateful to be able to take you there and spend some time with there. Any takeaways on that experience there?
Well, I had two. One was the feeling of shrine, the feeling of that's the first time I've been to cathedrals and whatnot in Europe when I was a teenager, but not in the place of actually being a Christian. So it was the first time that I'd been in a place that was a cultivating the sensibility of the sacred in a very deep way, as a Christian, and connecting with that lineage and that story, and also and having an interestingly like having a feeling of being like a newborn, like very fresh. Like, okay, I don't really understand what's going on here, so I'm just going to be witness to it. And then I had the other one. I think I shared it with you. One of the things that had been put into my mind in the build up to Symbolic World was, let's say, some concern from people who I know about the um, maybe some patriarchal characteristics, and I mean this in the conventional cultural sense, not in the Orthodox sense of the patriarchy. Um, and I had been reading actually. Okay, so where does this show up in Scripture? And you have Paul, right? I think it's Corinthians. I think it's actually Second Corinthians, which has, for example, women should be silent in the church. And I think I told you, I went back in the shrine a second time, and I was sitting in there, and there were three elderly Greek ladies in the back, and they were just straight up gossiping. Like you could tell by the sound and the tone of it. And I was like, oh, like that's what he was actually writing about. He was literally writing, ladies, please, can you keep it down? We're trying to pray in here. Because he was writing to a bunch of Greek ladies in Corinth who probably chatted just like those ladies in that shrine. It made me laugh because it reminded me of how we can be weirdly serious about what's about religion. Right? We've almost taken this weird non-human two-dimensional frame. But we have to remember that it was actually all real 3D humans living 3D lives and all the richness and ordinariness of humanity. And that has to be part of how we understand it was being written as well, right? So you've got the sacred eternal aspect, and you've also got the fullness of the human aspect. You have to have both present simultaneously when you're trying to understand what's being said. And for whatever reason, that insight just made me laugh.
Yeah, very nice. And I think you're right, and it's something that, as I've been, attending church, it's like it's an organic environment, and there's people there with flaws, like all of us there. Yeah, and it's like a flawed family, right? And you're there to support each other, be with each other, and help each other through life transitions and whatnot. And there's something about the people, and the term liturgy. I think we spoke about this a little bit before. Means the work of the people, right? So it's really about the work of the people, and it's almost like a training ground for relation, for being in right relation
Mm.
with other and with God. Those are the kind of the two main commandments in a sense. And when we think about what someone like Paul went through as a previously person persecuting Christians, and then became a saint, and Peter, Christ's closest disciple, denied Christ 3 times before the rooster crow. So it's not these distinctions between Christian and non-Christian and what that means is not very clear to us. And kind of in that same line, people criticize, especially on the Christian side, Jordan Peterson for, why don't you just become a Christian? Like, what are you doing? Either, S or get off the pot. You got one foot in and one foot out. But I see him and someone like John Vervaeke, who's obviously not explicitly a Christian, as they are sort of portal holders, or they open a sort of gate or some kind of
Mm.
door that if they went through, if Jordan Peterson says, I'm an Orthodox Christian or I'm a Christian, that gate would close. And this gate is playing a role of allowing others to come into the ark, so to speak. Right. And I
Mm.
have this picture of you kind of being flung in, in the ark. And I see like Raph Kelly, who I've had a conversation with before, who is, critical, not in a negative way of Christianity when we talked about. Now I understand that he's kind of coming towards finding Christianity. I think he plays a role of that. Peterson is playing a role of a portal where people are, you grabbing them by the hand, come on, get in. Where if he just went all into, I'm a Christian now, that portal would close. Maybe it's something like people that are philosophically, intellectually minded will take somebody like Jordan Peterson serious because he's got some great philosophical chops. And in doing so, might be able to approach something like understanding Christianity in a way that before was inaccessible to them, or maybe they were hurt by a experience they had at a church or whatever it may be. So it allows, I think, people to orient themselves and maybe take the ideas in Christianity seriously. Does that kind of track?
Yeah, I really like that image of the portal, and even like the role, like the duty of guardian,
Hmm.
and that there's actually something not like a falseness or a reluctance, but actually a proper holding of a duty and a responsibility. That's really interesting. That felt nice. One of the things I've really been chewing on for a while, but landing a lot in the past few days is this sort of stack. And my pastor mentioned that I think Paul has the same, like articulates the same stack, but not quite the full. So love, hope, faith, understanding, communication. And this is a little bit connected to, say, for example, propositional and participatory. But in this case, participatory grounds all the way down faith, hope, love. Like it's a richer, well, a more particular way of saying it. And the point would be something like, if let's say with John, who I know much better than I know Jordan, um, John is clearly situated in love. He's clearly situated in hope.
Hmm.
In fact, I would even say he's clearly situated in faith, but we have to talk about what I mean by that. And he endeavors mightily to be operating in understanding before he says anything. You see the clarity of his language. His language is always grounded in an understanding, and then he communicates. Right? And so, if if your heart is Christian all the way up through faith, and then if the level of understanding you're holding that open and playing with that, maybe that's actually the right place to be. Certainly, the reverse has been a tragedy. The people who are play acting, who are towing the line, saying the words, but their heart is not situated in love, and they are not actually grounded in faith. And maybe we should talk about what I mean by that. But
Hmm.
um, that's like kind of almost like the worst, because then you will become disillusioned of the words because they are disconnected from the thing to which they are supposed to be connected, and then you'll either become a we call it it's an ideology, a pure ideology, or you'll just become disillusioned and leave it altogether.
Yeah. No, excellent. And I'm glad you brought up this idea of ideology because in reading that Schmiemann book that I know that you've been reading through, he identifies secularism. He gives a kind of a blatant definition that secularism is a negation of worship.
Mm.
And and it makes me think of, when can we see that beginning of secularism, and what does that mean in negation of worship? Because it's not an effacement of worship, it's not a disbelief in God, it's a very specific thing, a negation of worship. And it had this picture in my head of it leaving a vacuum when this happened, and in my head it comes to like the idea of Descartes,
Mm.
which I think therefore I am, which really inaugurated the
Mm.
subject object divide. And I see that rift between subject and object as a vacuum being the negation of worship, right? In that, before that happened, we were really orienting ourselves and our identity as embedded within a community, within a people, where it was really something new where this cleavage happened between subject and object, and then subject and other. And then because of this distinction, we've had this beautiful way of organizing our world scientifically and inaugurating, technologies and modernizing, really instantiating modernity. But I think it's that the negation of worship and secularism that really stuck with me. And it's something like, and I wrote this down, is that, right worship is an immunization from ideology. And
Mm,
that rift of the negation of worship brought in this possibility, a probability of turning things into ideologies, because worship doesn't go away. It's been negated. So there's a felt absence there, and there's an inclination to not consciously fill that felt absence with the with ideological capture, in a sense. So maybe you can see if that tracks a little bit, and talk maybe of the idea of worship and ideology, where right worship can immunize one from becoming ideologically captured.
yeah. Well, you remember you. No, there's no reason why you'd remember this. A little while back, yeah, maybe about 3 weeks or a month ago, I tweeted that relationship was the opposite of ideology.
Hmm. Mm.
Um, and I think this is saying the same thing. And
Hmm.
worship here is a very particular quality relationship, um, very particular, a very important, specific quality of relationship. The characteristic of what is the right relationship between a created finite being and the infinite creator. Worship. That's the name we give to what would be the right relationship between. And maybe grace would be the opposite, but that's just plain. And so by severing that, negating, right? And negating is right, sever, negate. What happens there is you have a discontinuity, so separateness. And of course, that discontinuity is that cleaving. So the discontinuity comes with both a negative and a positive aspect. The positive aspect is that you get this new space to operate in, right? In some sense, a new liberty. Maybe it's all
Hmm.
negative, but in any event, for a moment, I'll play with the positive. Um, and the mind can step back. You can have this third person relationship with reality. You can examine reality, you can turn it around, you can look at it as separate from it, right? So the third personness move is what that negation affords. And okay, fair enough. That third personness move then gives rise to a set of capacities and a history. I should say the Enlightenment modernity are dependent on that third person move. And much of the political architecture that we've entered into is perhaps mostly a patching, an effort to patch what happens when you're sitting in that third person space.
Hmm.
Okay, well, now we're going to have to form agreements between each other because we're no longer fundamentally part of something. We're no longer intrinsically connected. Our connection now has to be pro facto fabricated. Okay, we're going to have a constitution. We're going to have a social contract, an agreement between now pre-assumed separate individuals. The connectedness is now secondary.
Hmm.
And ideology is that kind of thing. Ideology is a fabric of simulating a connection that allows one to be in something like an illusion or an image of communion. It creates identity. And it's funny, I kind of feel like I need to put like everything. Let's make them separate capital I and lowercase I. So it creates lowercase I identity, or identity in quotes. It creates membership. It even creates ethics, right? It creates morality. It orients choice. Like it does all those kinds of things, but it does all of it from the point of view of a simulation. It's all a
Hmm.
simulation of the real thing, because the real thing, once you've made that cleave, once you've made that cut, is no longer available. You're no longer in continuity of contact. You're no longer a part of a whole, where the wholeness is providing a very large amount of needful stuff. And so you're now endeavoring to synthetically integrate that whole, which is so funny. Like I'm flipping around from ontology and ethics and aesthetics. And I just shifted over to epistemology. This is the problem of the analytical method. You analytically, the classic problem of the analytical method. I
Hmm.
take a given body, I separate it into all of its parts, I identify what all the organs are, I try to put it back together again and have an operating human, and I lost something in the
Hmm.
process. I've lost the wholeness, and I can't bring it back together again, even if I try to integrate it, which is how you get a cybernetic organism. But I try to use something like technology, i.e., ideology, to reconstitute a wholeness from a disassembled set of parts. Mm.
Yeah. Now, well said. And I think Schmemann puts this. He even kind of indicts Christianity, and not just Western Christianity, but Orthodoxy as well, that since that's happened, we've from a Christian perspective have incorporated this cleavage into our understanding of Christianity, and in doing so, and he makes this comment that it was really interesting to me, but he says the same way that Christianity encountered the Hellenic world in its origins, right? Christianity is now encountering itself through the lens of secularism, you know,
Yeah.
something like that. And
Yeah.
that kind of needs to be worked out. And he brings the term symbolism in, and the term symbolism as the Greek word symboli, which means to throw together, right? So there's been the inverse of symbolism is, or the inverse of the symbolic is the diabolic, right? So diabolic, I don't mean it in a morally sense or in a, not even necessarily a negative sense, but something is diabolical, it splits apart, right? And the inherent comportment towards self, other, and world is this splitting apart to analyze. The inverse of that would be the symbolic, which is to bridge that gap, to heal that rift.
Hmm.
Um, and something that we discussed when we were watching Jordan Peterson, I think it was when he was doing a QA or his talk with Father DeYoung, there seemed to be something that wasn't landing for us and maybe for Peterson, or maybe just there was something, I think you could feel that rift. And it was because, as we discussed, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. He looks, and he's clinically analyzing, psychoanalyzing his patients, whatever it may be, even his wonderful, beautiful biblical series. It's the psychological significance of the Bible, which necessarily takes this third person view of the matter at hand. And he does it brilliantly. But there's something where that's missing in terms of the engagement or the participatory. And I don't mean it necessarily just that he's not going to church or whatnot, but there's something that's missing there in the participatory accent, or embodying, the discussion or the discourse that was kind of missing there. Does that make sense in terms of how we
Well, yeah.
experience it?
Let's cut both
Yeah.
because and it we can we're talking about Jordan Peterson, but this is also a larger context, and you mentioned that. So he's a psychologist both in the sense of being a theorist, Jungian archetypal myth, that kind of thing, and in terms of being, or at least maybe up until recently, I don't know if he lost his license, but being a practicing clinical psychologist. And those both have a different tone, but they connect. So, for example, in the context of being a clinical psychologist, you are, for money, by the way, for money, entering into a pseudo relationship. And there's no other way of saying it. It is, in fact, a pseudo relationship. You're not friends with the people who are your clients. In fact, you can't be friends. You're ethically obligated not to be friends. You're providing a particular kind of service. But the nature of your service means that you actually have to be deeply empathic. Like
Mhm.
you really have to cultivate a tremendous empathic sense. And the only way you can truly process the implications of the empathy, like the interior experience of the other that you're dealing with, then by that, what I mean is, if you're purely empathic and you're dealing with people's trauma and their tragedy, you're just going to be crushed. That's too much for a human being to bear. Particularly if you're just dealing with a lot of them, right? If it's like you're dealing with your wife or your mother, that's going to be pretty heavy. But if you're dealing with 15 people's divorces, that's going to be brutal. If it's 150 people, you're done. Right? So what do? We talked about actually the in the pastoral sense, priest or a pastor, what they do is they actually just give it up to Christ.
Mhm.
Right? They're not holding that responsibility. They're simply acting as a way to bring you as an individual into relationship with Christ, and Christ is the one who's doing the healing work, not them. But that's not the psychologist, right? The psychologist, they're actually the one doing the healing work. So what they have to do is they have to shunt that empathy into a mental framework. And it has to become psychologized. It has to become converted into a series of useful practices that can be deployed to address the clinical, that's literally clinical, medical, right? The medical, medicalized characteristics of perhaps your suffering and orient you towards a healthier way of coping with your life and acting in life. And of course, the problem with that is this can become a tremendous trap because now you have this superhuman capacity to be in empathic relationship with people, but it gets in the way of actually being able to be in empathic relationship with people, because every interaction is going to be simultaneously more empathic when you're using your clinical sensibilities, but shunted into a clinical mode. Right? So that's the interpersonal level, like one-to-one or I thou. And then the same thing happens when you're operating at the theoretic level, as you said, like you're always at this remove, and you're observing things through a mental lens as opposed to being sacrificed into it. You could imagine almost like the sense of well, that's a terrible way of putting it, but you can imagine a sense of like Jordan Peterson crucified and going, well, the symbolic and psychological implications of this are really rather profound, as opposed to actually suffering the experience. And that's a terrible way of describing it. But the point is to make that, kind of pop out the point. Um, and as a portal, as a guardian, like to honor the duty and responsibility that he's carrying, because I really do think that he is deeply endeavoring to fully carry the responsibility that he perceives as being his. And that's very much not a Jordan Peterson thing. Like that is our culture. That is the
Hmm.
culture of modernity. The culture of the Enlightenment is cultivating both of these loops, the interpersonal loops and the third person relationship with reality loop that shunts everything through some kind of ideological framework, some kind of construct. Um, that then ultimately is what guides action and choice. And all of that, my point of view, let's also shift to me. My point of view is deeply that entire architecture is wrong and catastrophic, although it can appear to be beneficial for a brief period of time. Um, but the beautiful thing is, as we said, worship, relationship, real relationship at the right scale, like at a scale that can actually be endured in the context of relationship, is the opposite of ideology and is the cure for the cultural ennui and the cultural malaise and the cultural catastrophe that is in the aftermath of that era we made.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think this thought came into mind of the difference between empathy and sympathy, right? Sympathy again being the root word of symbolism, sympathy, symbiotic, right? This sympathetic pathos that I think is present. So, what is the difference between something like psychoanalysis and something like confession, right?
Mm,
Because a confessor will hear a lot of people's problems, and there's it's obviously very similar where, I think of psychoanalysis as a secularized form of confession, because what do you do when you go to a psychoanalyst? You're talking about your sins, right? You're talking about where you've missed the mark in your relationships, where your parents might have missed the mark and they're relating to you, and how that's
mm,
promulgated into other relationships in your life, and your ability to do well at work, your ability to have a strong sense of self. And I think that psychoanalysis, it went off the rails as it became kind of ego psychology, westernized and filtered through the DSM-5, and it became about, prescribing medications, which has its place. But I think there's something that was turned or shifted there from its initial kind of inauguration there. And I think that psychoanalysis or psychology was sufficient enough to answer the question posed by the meaning crisis for a good 60, 70 years, maybe longer. I think that's run out now. And
mm,
I think there needs to be some sort of rectification, some sort of resolution there that's akin to something like what happens when you go to confession. And going to confession in the Orthodox tradition, it's and even in the West or in the United States, it's there's these rare spiritual confessors or spiritual fathers
mm,
that can have very profound effects when you go and confess with them. And there's a palpable healing that happens. And what is happening there? Because you go to even a great psychoanalyst, you're talking about your sins, and there's some well-being that can come from that. But to take it to that next level up in the stack, you're going to confess your sins to a spiritual confessor, and that person is there with you as a sinner and comports themselves as a sinner with you.
mm,
And your sins are being given up through repentance to Christ, and in that the healing happens. And I think that's right. The where I fall, where I'm inadequate in thinking of, is it possible to scale that without falling into the trap of the simulation or the secular trap? Is it possible to scale that process in the population to really affect that key through line of right relationship or worship, as we're saying here? What do you think?
Well, hmm. Tyson Yonkaporta, I think for me, made the nice distinction between scaling and growing. So
Hmm.
I'm going to keep that distinction. And scaling has to do with heaps. So you scale things at the level of metric or quantitatively. And there's an orientation towards quantitative. Number go up, that's scale. And so the short answer, the brief answer, but of course, the whole point is I'm setting up a distinction, is that if you endeavor to scale it, you will end up with the simulation.
Hmm.
The only thing you can scale is the simulation. And the simulation is a repeatable, finite subset, decontextualized. It has to be decontextualized to be able to be scaled. And then you copy and paste that
Hmm.
efficiently. Efficiently. But growth is a different kind of thing. And it's like you grow a family. Like you don't scale a family. That'd be like cloning yourself. Um, you have a child, and the child's a singularity. It is very different than you, but also is part of you, right? And that's the beauty of growth. Um, it maintains continuity, sameness. It is members of the same lineage, members of the same family, while also perfectly integrating difference, distinction, and that allows it to have the richness that it needs. Right? It continues to grow or to develop, to differentiate, while it is maintaining continuity and wholeness simultaneously. So if that's that's sort of the nature of what we're looking for. Right? So if we try to scale, we've already taken the first step has been a step off the cliff, although we may not notice it initially. Over here on growth, so the question is, can we grow it? Um, and the beautiful thing there is that the answer is yes. And I'm really literally thinking from a network perspective. It can only grow, however, at the pace of real relationship and at
Hmm.
the pace of healing and the pace of wholeness, or at the pace of liturgy, quite specifically. Right? So the work we do together. I was thinking, for example, the context of communion cannot be separate. Sorry, the context of confession cannot be separated from communion. That is both held in the space of communion and is ultimately resolved into communion. And the work of liturgy and the work of symbolism are also in the direction of communion. And by this, of course, I mean both the horizontal communion of the body of the church and the vertical communion with the Son and into the Father. So the Spirit, Son, Father communion at the top of the stack. And the pace of liturgy, I think, is a very nice way of thinking about it. And to think about it from just a straightforward network theory. You and I, if we relate to each other in a particular kind of way, we are mutually healing in a fashion. We're doing a certain kind of liturgy. The particular kind of way is the key. And this brings us back to the conversation on the stage with Father DeYoung and Jordan Peterson. But let's say we're actually able to operate in a communal, in a fashion that is available to the Spirit, in a fashion that is available towards communion. And we work the liturgy together. And here I'm using it in the kind of the broadest sense. We're working together in the context of symbolic work towards communion. And in so doing, each of us becomes more capable to give that gift to other people.
Hmm.
So it's actually a rapidly positive sum network effect. And to kind of shift it into nerd language, and it's actually stronger. It's a bigger exponent than the Metcalfe's law. It's a combinatorial explosion of anti-rival synergy,
Hmm.
and and that's the answer. Like that is actually the answer to the whole thing, to the entire question. Like all the questions that we face as a people, whether you're talking about the Moloch problem or you're talking about the what do you call it, inexorably self-terminating, or the presence of the fact that we're at the last stages of collapse of this civilization, or fill in the blank, the meaning crisis? The answer is just that. Like if we operate a particular kind of way where we're engaging in liturgical work at the pace of liturgy, um, to symbolically throw ourselves together into communion, horizontally and vertically, then everything begins to work for us, and this can grow. And so all of that is, let's say, true. I mean, mathematically or geometrically, the amount of bandwidth, the amount of networking, the amount of surface area, the amount of available time and energy and effort, that's all true. Like you get this massive, extraordinary surface area. Will we do it? That's a different question. That's a different question entirely.
Yeah, beautiful. That made me think that the virtual is necessary. Not it's necessary for this process to take hold. Maybe not sufficient, but in engaging the network through, these screens, right? It starts that process or enables that process, and I think it's a necessary part of the process. Again, with the obvious and easy way to critique these screens and these conversations that happen, I think it's almost necessary, that we're going to need these technologies that have spent so much of our time splitting us apart, social media, et cetera. We're going to need to reverse engineer them. And we have to believe that they can do good because they are part of God's world. Same thing with AI, right? I've been really thinking about, something like Angelic AI. And, there's an allergy from, myself and I think from Christians in general to look at AI as something nothing but negative and terminating to the to humanity in a sense. But AI is a part and parcel of God's world, right? So there's going to have to be these discussions or this line of thinking and discourse to interact and engage with these technologies, and not just the LLMs, but as they progress, to uh, orient them in the appropriate direction and to champion this right way of relationship. Because I think you're right that you just articulated the answer to the question of the meaning crisis through right relationship, and it's not in scale and numbers and in quantity, but it's scale and growth and quality. And that quality can be expressed through virtual screens, not completely, but enough to maybe get to a certain tipping point, something like that.
Yeah, so let's see. Should we jump to AI? It may be efficient to do that because in some sense it represents the ultimate of technology in general. Let's see. Okay, so we have one of the challenges that we run into may in fact the well, okay, there's two, is unintended consequences. The second, of course, is the increasing magnitude of intended consequences that are themselves creating unintended consequences. Let's just for the moment assume Socrates' principle that nobody really intends evil, they just make lots of errors. The adversary intends evil, so we'll have to put that third one in, which is that our skillfulness has a thumb on the scale sometimes, and if we lack adequate skillfulness, then that which does intend evil can force the shot. But if I imagine, for example, GPS, it's probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing that I don't get lost anywhere near as much anymore, and that I can get places efficiently and easily, and I can be organized, and that's helpful. I don't feel yucky. However, I notice that as a Gen X who grew up and learned how to navigate well before the ubiquitous Google Maps. I don't like being addicted to it. Like I don't like being unable to navigate a space. So if I know a place, if I'm going to be in a place more than twice, I want to actually know how to get around that place on the basis of my own neurology. And I'll just hypothesize the unintended consequence piece, because our neurology is a stack. So for example, I learned from John Vervaeke that our sense of justice literally sits on top of the neurology that provides our sense of balance. So if we did something that jacked up our sense of balance at the neurological level, we would also discover that we've jacked up our sense of justice
Hmm.
at the, whatever we want to call that level, theoretic level, or interpersonal, social level, without even necessarily knowing why. And you can imagine that it might be that the part of our brain that is responsible for navigating through space may actually have some important connections to our sense of balance, or the part of our neurology that does balance. And if we somehow, because that's pretty deep stuff, right? Moving through space is a pretty deep animal thing. And so if we mess up that, we hypertrophy certain parts of it and ameliorate other parts of it, we may actually negatively impact our sense of balance, which would then negatively impact our sense of justice. We become
Mhm.
justice blind. Not not blind justice, but justice blind. That's an unintended consequence. So this is a problem because our understanding of reality is brutally limited. Um, our ability and willingness, our willingness to do a holistic check of the possible unintended consequences of our technologies, and our ability to do so, even if we really want to, are both very constrained. So then the only thing you can do is you can either use the go slow, an Amish sensibility, like no, we're not going to introduce GPS. We'll introduce GPS to 1% of the population every decade for the next 1,000 years, and we'll see what happens. And if it turns out that over 1,000 years we finally got there and everything's okay, then fine, it's part of our culture. But we've got enough slowness that if anything bad happened, it only hurt us a little bit. We know it's bad, we can pull it back. Um, you know, a precautionary principle implemented in that way, distributed in both time and space. And therein, I think, is like that's a knot, right? The knot is that technology produces new possibilities. And to the degree to which those new possibilities produce unintended consequences that disrupt load bearing elements of our reality, then that's really bad. And our ability to understand and our ability to make choices to inhibit our technologies on the basis of that understanding is woefully inadequate. And AI raises the same issue. So I can list many, many examples of what we could do with AI that are good, at
Mhm.
least apparently good. And of course, I can also list things that are bad. By the way, apparently bad. We don't even know that. We can't even answer it. AI turns everything into paper clips. That's terrible. Well, it turns out paper clips are super conscious. Oh, neat. That was really great. We don't know. We just don't know. So this kind of like this puts us in a really odd spot. Um, we cannot answer this question using our intellect. It's bigger than that. It's beyond our capacity to actually think our way through. So it becomes the kind of thing that we can only truly access through faith, which is a deeper substrate.
Mhm.
Um, Now that is a potent thing. What that means is that we have to really, really get a handle on what that means. Like, what does faith mean? And what does faith mean in that context? And then what would it mean for us to cultivate the proper, let's say, kind or quality or strength of faith to be responsive to the problem of technology and of AI?
Yeah, excellent. I think that I started thinking, it's going to take those people that have the right relationship, the right comportment towards worship to build these systems. But then I thought that seems unlikely because if you're brought into that right relationship, it seems like that you wouldn't be something that you would move forward with, but maybe not. But it might take something like we have now, where we have these systems, social media and whatnot, that were built for profit and have scaled up and have disoriented us. It's going to take using those systems that are flawed and they're oriented inappropriately, to kind of use those systems in order to find that right relationship to grow something like we're talking about here. But
Okay, hold on. Something just came up. I mean, let's try this out. I just was so as we kind of run this story forward, meaning crisis is here. And you mentioned that something like, say, psychotherapy was able to plug a hole for a couple decades. And in my mind, I wanted to add things like fancy cars and big houses, material wealth, video games, entertainment. Like there's a bunch of things that we use to sort of like paper over that the lack of worship, the lack of that relationship, and all the other elements that go with it. Okay, so as that is increasingly obviously falling apart, and we're crossing back into the chasm, the abyss of the meaning crisis. The only way out of that is we have to reconnect with the deeper substrate of meaning. Now, what we notice, one of the things we notice when we reconnect with the deeper substrate of meaning is that it's strictly non-financializable.
Mhm.
Right? Real relationship is strictly non-financializable. The allocation of any amount of finance to your relationship with your wife, i.e., well, let's go with your kids because I don't want to use any curse words. And this is, I think, very, very important. Even a babysitter, a well-intentioned babysitter, is actually kind of a bad thing. What should be happening is they should all be held in relationships of actual care, actual human relational care. And so this is the extended family, the family of the church, whatever it looks like. Because as soon as you add money to it, it debases it in a fundamental way. Okay, well, that's interesting because if we look at the incentive landscapes and the coordination techniques that we've developed, the ones that you're pointing to, that have enabled the development of corporate bodies that have the skill set to build AI and to incentivize and motivate people to do so, those are all driven by financialization. They're all driven by money. And so to the degree to which the bottom drops out of money, and by the way, that may happen in the purely financial sense, right? If we just have a straight up currency crisis and the value of money goes to zero. But from a meaning level, if more and more people reorient their choices on the basis of meaning rather than money, then that gives rise to a very different trajectory. So then you would actually have a circumstance where those who are most capable of cultivating worship will become the new attractors in fields of new forms of coordination, in this case, communion. And then bodies that are brought into that communion, if they happen to have skillfulness in the creation of AI, would be able to do that, like if that's their calling. But they would be doing it on a basis of meaningfulness, not of money. And I would argue that moving the choice making and the incentive landscape that produces AI from a strictly financial one to, well, and not the alternative, which would be a strictly power one. We don't want to, we want it to be a military weapon arms race, and we don't want it to be a arms race in Moneyland either, but to another basis, a human basis, with a diversity of values, all of which are actually being honored and driving it, is really important. Like sine qua non. Like we're definitely not well served. All the other things I talked about in terms of what it would look like for us to get to right relationship with AI, we're super not well served if the way that we're driving AI is a arms race in either Moneyland or Powerland or the combination thereof. Like the likelihood that will end up being circumspect and careful and well considered and wise is very, very, like not very low. Is zero. Like we could say it's categorically zero. And we could say with, I think, I don't have to be like mean to the accelerate or the technophilic people when I say that big, powerful things that are going to impact a large portion of human life require wisdom and care and thoughtful design. And that doesn't, I don't think anybody's going to reject that. So say, hey, look, wisdom, care, and thoughtful design can't happen over here because all the incentives are going to be pushing towards not having those drags. So we all sort of will ultimately end up agreeing that we need to be moving over here in some fashion. So the question is, what does that look like? So that's I'm sorry, I wandered over there, but that's one piece. And the other piece to say, by hypothesis, the bottom is dropping out of money. That's the thing that just came to me. I think that's quite likely. The bottom is dropping out of money for a number of different reasons. And therefore, we're beginning to reconnect with the deeper substrate of value, which can't go away, but can be occluded or elided into simple things like money. And as we drop into that deeper substrate value, of course, we have to get our footing and reconnect with that and learn how to live in that way. But that deeper substrate does completely connect with worship. Hmm.
Yeah, that gives me hope. Uh, that gives me hope actually. And something came to mind, a kind of sort of throwaway line Jonathan had, and I don't know if you were there for that one. He says that thank God he was there. He brought his wife up, which was a wonderful moment. And he said, we were poor. I was doing mission work and whatnot, and now we're not poor. We're well off. And he says, but when you're poor, miracles happen. That's when
Mm.
miracles happen, right? So I found that interesting, and I reflect back on my own life where I was going through struggles financially, and things happen where things come together, and it made me think that if the bottom falling out of the financial system will present an opportunity for miracles to take place,
Nice.
something like that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And it's weird. I believe that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. In fact, this is a very prosaic, but it's a funny way of actually experimenting with it. You heard the story about our wedding, I imagine.
Go on. I don't think
And
I heard it.
so Vanessa and I got married on Valentine's Day,
Mhm.
and we were poor in a particular way, meaning the various kinds of resources that are associated with a wedding, like time and the ability to bring your family and things like that, were hard, like figuring that out. So we kind of were stuck in this mode where a secular wedding, which would cost whatever, $20,000, $50,000, would take 6 to 12 months to figure out how to plan, um, involve all kinds of logistics. So those are all different kinds of resources. And all of those are like, oof, not available. So we flipped into a very different mode. Um, and miracles happened. I mean, the whole thing came off in 6 days, something like that. um, Extremely beautiful, and for everybody involved, symmetrically. Not just, it wasn't like about us; it was about God and about the church. And so many people were grateful, like thanked us for having done it and done it in this way. And like 6 or 7 things, Vanessa had her wedding dress was fit her perfectly with no tailoring, 1 and 1, like did no shopping, it was just offered and was a gift because one of the other people's daughters had a dress and she wasn't going to wear it. They're going to send it back. Like, take this, like lightweight miracle, like not a big miracle, but the kind of thing where as they begin to build and add together, there's a felt sense of being in a tremendously rich, being held by grace. And if you feel, yeah, that's so wonderful. And I remember actually hearing stories about the Great Depression where, wow, that's so powerful. I hadn't really thought about this way before. So the Great Depression played out very differently in the United States and in Germany. In the United States, people were poor and people were hungry and people suffered and people died. But many people reported it as being a wonderful time because communities pulled together and they had a felt
Mhm.
sense of closeness and connectedness, more so than they had in the 20s and after that. Now, Germany, of course, the bottom fell out and the entire culture turned in on itself and began to go mad. Um, but of course, there was also a difference. That America was a profoundly Christian nation at the time, and Germany, because of Nazism, had willfully chosen to completely return to a Roman inspired paganism, which has that sense of consuming each other as part of the energy of that. So it's really interesting, like to think, okay, if the bottom's going to fall out of money, and part of what we need is actually for that to happen, so that we
Mhm.
can awaken from the or cut the puppet strings, but then we actually have to reinvigorate our capacity to dance in the spirit and with each other, reconnect with worship and communion. Um, how do we avoid the bottom falling out trajectory sending us towards Germany in depression and have it send us towards the United States during the depression?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is, the future of currency, the future of currencies is faith and trust. It's faith and trust in a sense. And I think it might be interesting to think about that in terms of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin gives us the ability to have trust. It's Bitcoin's is a way of a material way of the truth to come into the world. Something like that is a way to verify trust. So I think there's some kind of low resolution picture uh, of right relationship with self and other through faith and trust that will be the currency of the world to come. Something like that. Um, but what could that potentially look like? I guess we'll see, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think Bitcoin to me, as I look at it, sits at the pivot point between those two futures. Because if we put our faith and trust in Bitcoin qua Bitcoin,
Mhm.
we're probably in really terrible trouble. But if we put our faith and trust in God and then in communion and in community, in humans, in real relationship, and then we bring Bitcoin into service of that as a way of incarnating certain qualities of faith and trust, then we'll be in good shape. It lives on both sides of the line, and I think this is I think emblematic of all of what we do. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. I really like adding to the AI conversation, the recognition that hey, there's other stuff going on here, and all that's happening in these races, the state's falling apart too. I don't know if you've noticed. Its legitimacy is at a low ebb. It's hard
Mhm.
for it to go lower statistically. It will over the next year, I assure you. So the state's ability to coordinate in anything like a coherent fashion is effectively zero, frankly. Like if the United States endeavored to create a national AI militaristic thing, the CIA, the NSA, the DoD, the various branches of the DoD would all be at each other's throats. They'd all be creating competing AIs because nobody trusts anybody else. And that's just in the US, much less the Germany and France and the EU and et cetera. And of course, the market is sitting on top of this substrate of money, which is in the process of absolutely catastrophically caterwauling all over the place. And so when the bottom falls out of that, we're in a really interesting spot. Really interesting spot. It's funny. It's funny that you said hope because I also feel hope in that space because I feel that there's a much larger thing going on. And if we can just be guided by love, not fear, and enter into that big thing, like just allow that thing to guide us and to be dancing with it, then we'll be held.
Yeah, I think the economic structures, the political structures, and the media structures are failing, and it seems to be that what worked before, for whatever reason, the advent of the internet, of smartphones, of distributed media, what worked before to hold this order together or this simulation of order doesn't work anymore. And it seems like there's a rapidity of things once hidden being revealed
Mm.
at such a rapid pace that it's melting all of these institutions, and it's chaotic, and it's obviously causes anxiety, but on the other side of that, it seems like is the logos, right? The
Mm.
logos is sort of shining through to me, and depending on what you focus on, watching the pieces of the institutions fall, you could either focus on the debris coming down, or you could focus on the light shining through, which is actually presenting this new opportunity to kind of unfold. Um, which I think it's a beautiful time to be alive. It's a consequential time to be alive, and that gives me hope as well. Um,
Mm.
did you had a few minutes to talk about the logos a little bit? The
Sure, let's
logos.
give it a shot.
Okay. So I've been wrestling with John chapter 1. And it's interesting to read it in the Greek. And I'm just going to, lay it out a little bit for you and let me know what you think. So obviously, St. John chapter 1 begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the God uh, was the Word. He was in the beginning with God. All things through him came into being, and without him, um, not even one thing has come into being. So let's focus on those first words.
Okay.
From an English perspective, in the
You can read it in
beginning
Greek,
was
by the way. I've read that. I've read John in Greek, so I have a
perfect. That's what I was going to pivot to here. So we have in the beginning of was the Word. What does that mean? A single word, a sentence, what does that mean? In Greek, it is en archi io logos, right? Archi, so beginning, the word is archi, which is arch, which means the beginning, and temporally. It
Yeah.
means the head, it means the apex, and it means the telos, right?
Mhm.
So in archi, all of those things temporally and spatially are incorporated. Was e or logos was the logos. So the big
You're making me laugh because you have a Greek a contemporary Greek accent.
yeah
So I'm actually like, okay, I'm translating it slightly. I've read it
yeah
in a dead language Greek class. So please continue.
yeah.
Yes.
No,
Okay.
it's
Look.
and then so what does this mean? So in Greek, I mean in English, in the beginning was the word. In the Greek meaning of at the ultimate culmination of space and time was the head, the start, and the culmination of the telos, right? Was the logos. The word for logos it just doesn't do it a service at all, right? So what does logos mean? It's the second person of the Trinity, right? It's the fundamental organizing principle of reality. It means wisdom, reason, action, word. So there's so much in that one few words. Just breaking that down, you could spend hours just talking about what that means in terms of what does it mean to say Christ was there at the founding of the world? How can we kind of understand that? Christ is the Logos, right? The second person of the Trinity. And continuing on, he says, "En archi io logos, ke o logos I prosto theon," right? The word was with God. The term prostotheon, pros is a root word of prosopos, which means face. So the logos was with and facing ton theon, with God, right? Geotheos io logos, and God was the word, right? So it shows the distinction in the unity of the first and the second person of the Trinity. They are both one and separate, right? Identity and difference, right? And its distinction is extremely important. You know what I'm saying? Like, God, God the Father, um, which it's interesting, this as an aside, like the term father, the root word in Greek is patera, right? The root word of the term patera is pattern, right? It's the
Mhm.
same root word as pattern, right? And the term mother in Greek is mitera. The root word of the term mother is mitera, which is matter, right? So mother, so father, pa, pattern, mother, ma, matter. So this patterning in matter, right, is the coming together of heaven and earth.
Mhm.
That landed so hard on me when I kind of came across that, and the idea of the logos, the symbolic idea of the appropriate mediation of heaven and earth, the appropriate mediation of pa and ma, of pattern and matter. That's where the logos arises in a sense, and that's the symbolic event par excellence. And it's a fractal. It happens in your family. It can happen at a corporation. It can happen in a government in a sense, right? Um, and it makes me think in another kind of trite example of this program playing out is something like football. Let's take the New England Patriots in the 2000s, right? Became a dynasty. So the logos, the telos of National Football League is to win championships, right? That's the end, right? And in doing so, you have to have heaven and earth being mediated appropriately. But what is heaven? The pattern is the game plan that's in the coaches or the coaching staff's head, right? That game plan, right? Heaven is the schema, the game plan. Earth is the bodies of the team, right? The physical, the team members, right? The individuals, right?
Mhm.
What is the mediation between heaven and earth in this sense? It's the quarterback, right? The quarterback inhabits the schema, inhabits the pattern of the coaching staff on the field and mediates and communicates this program to the team by being a leadership, right? And the ultimate telos of this program is to win championships. And if you win championships over time, you become a dynasty. So something as archaic as the understanding of heaven and earth being mediated appropriately through man is beautifully exemplified through a game plan, a team, and a leader coming together to reach whatever that goal is. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Mhm. I'm just enjoying two things. I mean, enjoying a lot, by the way. Don't let me even the least bit distract you. You're
yeah.
saying it's amazing. I'm just laughing at one. Are you trying to tell me that Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball? Or are you trying to say that Tom Brady is Jesus Christ? Which, for many people in Boston area, that may be pretty close to true. And
Yeah.
that tells us something, actually, right? Because when somebody actually does really, truly, deeply embody the proper bringing together of heaven and earth, we can't help but notice the similitude between that individual and the King of Kings.
Yeah, I think that example is important because to show that this is the ultimate kind of fundamental nature of reality, that it's also something like how a family works, right? You have the economy of the family, Greek economia. It's not just financial; it's the orienting or an organizing of the family. You have you know, you have the father or the primary caregiver of the father playing that mediator between heaven and earth, and also a corporation. You have the CEO, you have the board of directors, and you have policies and procedures and whatnot, right? And then you have the people that work at that corporation. I've been in different corporations where you can feel when heaven and earth are being mediated appropriately because there's a
Mhm.
resonance between the policies and the procedures, how they're enacted, and how the people receive them and reciprocate back. And you can also feel really, really easily when there's a rift between heaven and earth, right? If the CEO or the branch leader or whatever it may be, practically is not embodying those two principles appropriately, you're going to have kind of disunity. So
I
the
would
very,
actually put the way I would put vision, mission, strategy for where you're putting policies and procedures.
yes, yep.
Everything comes from up, from the above is vision, mission, strategy, and that lands in the CEO, and then the CEO translates that down by means, for example, policies and procedures, but ultimately down into the people and back up. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this is right, and it's interesting because it is actually palpable.
Mhm.
You know, when you're on a team and the team is in communion, heaven and earth are being mediated properly. Um, then there's a feeling. You feel it. And it can be very like just a pickup basketball game. It can happen.
Mhm.
Jazz band is a classic example. And this is true also at an individual level. Like I was also thinking that saying Clapton is God, right? When Clapton was acting as the single individual point, where the codes of music are coming down from one direction, and the embodied capacity to cultivate the movement of music in a guitar was coming up at the same level, and then Clapton is sort of sitting at the center of that. Um, when you're witnessing that, you're witnessing the actual expression of the divine into earth. And you can feel the difference of what happens when it is on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah, and that bodily examples, let's double click on it a bit, right? So you have a head, the ark, right? Archi, the head, right? And so you have heaven, which is the head, and you have earth, which is the body, right? So much so that what do we do if we're mediating heaven and earth appropriately? We're eating right. We are incorporating food into our body through heaven, by the way, incorporating the right food, having the right relationship with food to have a healthy body. We're also incorporating information through the eyes, right? So we're taking in, we're taking information digitally, whatever it may be, through, I think of the brain, as a more tightly woven stomach. The stomach it's as above, so below. So what do? We really pay attention to what we eat, right? We want to be fit. We want to feel good. So we pay attention to the food that we eat. We should probably also pay attention to the things we allow into our second gut up here, right? And when that's done appropriately, right, you're mediating, heaven and earth appropriately individually. That it's a good feedback loop for right relationship to occur. And I think something that really drives this is prayer, right? And prayer to me drives the right relationship with prayer drives relevance realization. And the more you pray, right, the more you come into right relationship with worship, the more certain things become relevant in your life, family, individual, corporation, whatever it may be, and other things fall away. So there seems to be a correlation with something like right relationship to prayer and worship and the ability for the ability for relevance realization to occur in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's just add fasting, right? So prayer and
Mm-hmm.
fasting. So we got our gut in the mix as well. And the experience I've had since I've now been fasting, you know, periodically for quite a while, is silence or clarity. This is a bunch of noise, a bunch of sort of little micro bad habits, I feel a little off, therefore I will eat something. I feel a little
Mhm.
bit X, I'll eat something, like a simple bad habit. Because fasting is a clean line, it silences that after a period of time. And then there's a new clarity. The noise is out of the way. And then, of course, in my point of view, with my experience, and I think this is the way it works generally, um, when the struggle of the fasting activates a want or desire to eat, that then I reorient that towards prayer. So now I'm praying more. And the prayer does the same kind of thing at the level of the spirit, right? It clarifies, it gets rid of a bunch of noise, it
Mhm.
simplifies, reorients things properly. And so after like 12 hours, somewhere kind of that depth into the fast, maybe 16 hours, there really is a real neat, clean orientation. And I noticed, by the way, for me at least, a significant increase in my perception of beauty. The
Mm,
world is more palpably more beautiful.
yeah. Wonderful. Wonderfully put. And it's said, in an Orthodox tradition that you should not fast without prayer. Like the
Mm.
prayer is necessary. It's a necessary facet to fasting. And we see, because fasting, it eliminates your body's constant working of digesting, right? And it's interesting to think of,
Mm.
how fasting when you're hunger, it's a pang from earth to heaven, right? And kind of meeting that relationship appropriately. But when this secular or this new age idea of fasting, it's fraught because if you fast without the appropriate comportment towards prayer, uh, to it opens you up in a sense. And if you're not guided appropriately, it, it's not very clear what's coming in,
Nice.
something like that.
We all have got some pretty good rules, and
Yeah,
that's a good one. And
yeah,
they may all be good rules, but of the ones that I've encountered first person, I completely agree. I think
yeah,
no fasting without prayer. Check.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so a few more minutes. I didn't know if you wanted to, spend a few minutes talking about the bodily resurrection, as it was
Wow.
ex
Okay.
explored through Father De Young's talk, um, with at the
Let me check
summit.
and make sure I'm not stepping on any timing. No,
Sure,
no,
sure.
looks
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
So I watched it again, the talk again, and it landed a bit more for me. And it really had to do with something like identity, right? And he talks about in the talk that we think of identity as our innermost self, the thing that makes us unique, the thing that makes me different than you, different than my parents, and whatnot. And this is a very kind of Gnostic view, right?
Mhm.
And he was situating the idea of the soul and the body as more of something that is distributed in your relationships rather than
Yeah,
this
so
inward
let's
thing.
slow down. I want to.
Yeah,
So yeah, he talks about the notion that we make a distinction between the soul and the body, and then we identify ourselves with something called the soul.
mhm,
And the definition of the soul that we can increasingly identify with is the particular uniqueness that is us, just us, and nothing else. So we do this kind of negation thing where we keep throwing stuff out of the soul that is shared in any way until we get to that unique thing that is a singularity of just us. And at the end, we discover that it's nothing. There's nothing there. We've actually deleted everything. So that's kind of the first move. And then the second move is this one that you're talking about. So bring that one.
and that's of course the root of nihilism, right?
Yes.
It's this the apotheosis or the culmination of this idea is nihilism, and Nietzsche pointed that out very poignantly, and we find ourselves in this situation. Um, so the talk was on the bodily resurrection, and we think of something like the bodily resurrection as, we will for eternity be situated in a body because the idea is the body's resurrected with the soul in a sense. And how can we think of that? Does it mean the material that we're made out of? We recycle our cells every 10 years, and our body obviously decomposes in the earth after, we are no longer here. So, what can we think of the bodily resurrection? And he brings it from more of the spatial idea to more of a temporal idea of the bodily, of your body, your identity is reflected and distributed within the relationships that you have with those that you encounter in the world, right? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So wait,
yeah,
let's slow
go ahead.
that down again because this thing is profound. It's a massive shift.
Mhm.
So So then we talk about the notion of the resurrection of the body. And we have two problems. One problem is we've already run into this nihilism when we take the soul as being the only thing that truly is us. And then the second problem we have is then we think about the notion of the body as like, are we kind of like a gold version of Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen movie? Or is it just like this body, but for some reason it doesn't have bad breath and doesn't need to eat? Or does it need to eat? It does have bad breath, but it dies and it keeps coming back. Like what's going on there? And then, by the way, remember he also put on the notion of the timeline.
Hmm.
Uh, and in is the body resurrected with the soul in a situation which is effectively akin to this life right now, but really, really nice, but also like forever. So a chronological sequence of days that now, because the body doesn't corrupt, lasts forever. But now you have the problem of um, how does anything become meaningful in that context? Because our entire life here on Earth becomes an infinitesimal slice of a billion-year life. Does that mean that everything that just happened on Earth really is just a blink of an eye and brutally meaningless, or was just an on-off switch? We made it, we didn't make it. Is that what's up? So like, okay, so that's where we are. And then he proposes a pivot, a real like a fundamental shift in the nature of what we're talking about, which is that our identity is our relationships. All right,
Hmm.
now please keep going.
Yeah, I think that's the important point that kind of landed for me as well. What happens to this life when we have life, ever after in eternity? And what happens, after we're resurrected 10,000 years from now? What happens to the memories that we have of this life that we're living in here? Um, and it something crystallized for me of how we can inhabit both time and eternity in thinking through this, right?
Mm,
And it gave me a lot of like some crystallization that like I've had this experience, and this might be a little bit off, but this experience of when I sing to my son every night. I've been doing it for years now, and the same song, it's John Lennon's Beautiful Boy, right? And there's this feeling that I get, and it's weird, of like spatially and temporally, like my future self inhabiting my body at that time. It's this, there's almost like a bubble effect that happens there, this warp that happens. And all of these, and Father Young talks about these joyful moments in our life, how they are preserved through and into eternity, but as part and parcel of this life in time as well. So it seems like this life becomes a contraction in eternity that we experience, and having life ever after does not diminish this time. So the resurrection of the body is the participation of this lifetime into eternity, something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. So let me play with that a little bit.
Please.
When he was talking, I was reminded of the book Matter and Memory from Henri Bergson, which I think is brilliant.
Mhm.
And Bergson makes an argument. He's obviously making an argument from a 19th century perspective, but that memory kind of isn't what we think it is. Let's put it that way. And we have a version or a relationship with memory that is almost, how do we say, metaphorically tied to artifact, like a letter. So I write down a phrase on a piece of paper, and that preserves that event, that moment in particular moment in time through time. So then we say, oh, well, that's what memory must be like. It's like it's written down. Okay, maybe it's written down the neurons of our brain. Like we've written down like a photographs. When I remember my daughter's birth, it's like I'm watching a video in my head, and my head is somehow storing it. Nowadays, since we live in a digital era, we store it in a digital sense. And he actually says, no, that's not how it works at all, actually. I'm not sure if he specifically invokes the Kairos Chronos distinction, but it's a useful way of thinking about it. What he actually talks about it is it's more like our ability to be present to a moment in is limited, but that the events that have occurred in the past are fully alive. Hmm. And our memory is a faculty for moving our awareness into that location in time. So in some sense, to say it in chronologically, we actually move our awareness into the actual past, which is an actual location. It's not like it goes to zero.
Mhm.
It's there. It is actually there. and we move our awareness to that location, and then we are inhabiting that location again. So when we're,
Mm.
and I've had this experience. I've had the experience of having two different kinds of memory. One is like recall, and one is more like
Hmm.
remember. Right?
Hmm.
Recall is more like a digital image. I'm actually able to fabricate the image and kind of pull it up. And the other is more like, wait, I'm actually kind of feeling like I'm there. It feels very similar to how I feel right now when I'm here. And
Hmm.
this doesn't feel the same as watching a video. This feels like I'm in an embodied presence in a moment in reality. And certain kinds of memories, and I've had ones also where there's a being present to the future,
Hmm.
have that feeling. Okay. So that's how he describes it. Now, what I was hearing DeYoung say is that roughly three things happen. And by the way, I don't know, that was intense. So I'll do my best. One is it's almost like your awareness expands and your capacity to perceive that totality of the timeline of your life is now a single moment, akin exactly to your experience of being in this present moment. And so you have an awareness of this moment.
Mm.
And the moment is bled out over, it's not a second, it's not a nanosecond, it's not an hour, it's in the order of a couple of seconds, maybe 15. At a certain point, it becomes something where you're like, yeah, do you remember that? Yeah, I do. But here there's a presence. Like presence has a volume to it. And of course, presence, when you say to be present, when you're fully in presence, that's when you're orienting towards the verticality, towards the kairos element
Hmm.
of time. Right. So the idea is what happens is that when you the bodily resurrection is that kairos element expands. And so the totality of your chronological life is now a single kairos moment
Hmm.
that you perceive as the same way you perceive this moment. You have full access to it completely. It is completely alive in that way. So that's one piece. Now, of course, it's removed from it's still in Chronos, so you're not going to be able to act in the same way. Um, but the second movement is this movement of the ash or the wheat and chaff or the ash and gold, which are those aspects of those moment of that Chronos, that chronological life that is preserved, is alive in a vertical way. So it's
Mm.
parts of your life that were present, the parts of your life that were touched by presence, the parts of your life like singing to your son every night is beautiful because you're also locking those experiences into that quality. And so those are all preserved. Right? Those are all
Hmm.
rendered gold. They're part of that moment of eternity. And the ones that aren't, right? So when he talks about this notion of like what passes away, it's almost like he reverses it. Instead of it being that 50% of the population goes completely away and 50% of the population is sort of all of their lives are put into heaven. He's saying it's more like 100% of the population has the possibility of going all the way, but 50% of your life may actually be evaporated, or maybe 80% of your life, because it was all just playing video games. It's just nonsense. It doesn't actually, it's all Chronos, no Kairos, to put it in that simple language. In principle, you could have it all Kairos or mostly Kairos and very little Chronos, which is great because then all of that is preserved.
Hmm.
And then the last move is almost like the verticality, like the timeline instead of going this way, it goes this way. So now it's like this thing that was this long and has now been rendered into gold and is living in eternity, then begins to be able to expand.
Mm.
What that means, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. Well said, man. You just made it land uh tenfold. I'm gonna have to chew on that for a bit.
It,
It,
Caveat, I may have led you astray, so I would definitely
yeah,
double check with the horse's mouth. And I'm hoping at some point to have a conversation with him because it's
yeah,
when I mean mightily. But yeah, that's
yeah,
what it looked like to me.
yeah. This idea of presence made me yeah, like eternity, right? Presence, eternity seemed
Yeah.
kind of in the same vein. But well, I think that's a great place to end it. Um, thank you for your time. I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you for bringing us into eternity.
Yeah. Till next
Wow.
time.
All right.
God
Look
bless
forward.
you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, God bless you as well.
Yep.